to try to equally devote time to the development of humility. Because I think that humility is paramount in the spiritual discipline. If it's not carefully cultivated along with wisdom, then the wisdom can create another expression of the ego. So yes, I think that that's been my most profound, let's say, insight into the relationship to your ego, is that a step towards humility is an ego death in itself. Teach yoga in English, and to kind of tell that I'm from a certain part is perfect.
Yeah, it just fits right snug in there, and it's not.
We're very British in our sense of humor and stuff.
Yeah.
Very sarcastic.
So today we have Mitch. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, total pleasure. Thank you very much.
I really am interested to know who you were before to where
Okay.
you are now.
So I grew up on the Sunshine Coast, and then I spent a lot of my adult life before I moved here to Barcelona on the Gold Coast, which is then south of Brisbane. So they're the two kind of coastal towns either side of Brisbane. So I was very blessed. You can imagine they're cool places to live for sure.
Would you say growing up you had an early just awareness, self-awareness?
No, I would say well, I mean, I don't think I have a very high level of self-awareness now, or I try to keep myself out of the mentality maybe of thinking that I do, because then if you start thinking that way, you stop progressing quite rapidly. So maybe from a young age, I think I was always a sensitive child. I had an older sister, and I always used to, it's weird, I used to enjoy her friends, but not in the way you might think. Listening to them and understanding that they were quite more emotionally involved than my friends, and the complexity. So I remember enjoying that and having a sense of peace in that, which was a interesting dimension of my childhood. But also I would say from the reflective side of myself, I had a strong obsession with fat Buddhas. You know the fat Buddha statue? The really, yeah. The laughing one, the big fat one.
Yes.
My godmother had many of them in her house, and I distinctly remember, they would be my youngest moments of recognizing a spiritual thing of some description. I went to a Catholic school, so there was Catholicism in my life, but my parents were kind of not Catholic, if that makes sense. They just wanted me to go to the school because they thought it would be a bit cleaner, a bit safer, whatever those reasons are. So they were very much you don't have to listen in religion. So it wasn't as if I was there to learn religion, and whenever I was there, which I think was a blessing and a curse, because now in some ways I wish that I had listened a little more, because I recognize the teachings of Jesus as profound, and I think that the Bible is a profound book, even though there are cultural references there that are clearly outdated, etc. But I think at its core essence, it does contain the main things that all spiritual disciplines are communicating. So potentially, if my mind was maybe a little more open from a younger age, I could have received some of that. But then again, also the way that the Catholic school system educates religion, I don't think it was very well done. I think it could be done better.
What was it that you felt could have been better?
I disagree with the idea that God is a man that sits in heaven and is going to come down and punish you.
Yes.
I would say that integrating God into the individual is where I disconnect from the way it was taught. It was taught in the sense that there is an authority figure that was separate from us, whereas I think from my current investigation into God, I suppose, would be that it's more of an integrated thing. It's an internal thing. So that would be the way that I'd say that now, if I look back at from what I can remember, which is not I don't remember a lot of religion classes, to be honest, but I do remember thinking that the way I was interpreting God there was that he was some sort of, figure that was there to punish us.
Like a man-made figure.
Exactly.
Was there a catalyst to all of this? Like, where did it
There
come
was
into your
probably
life?
2 catalysts that I would have to say. The first one is just a yoga class that occurred. But before that yoga class occurred, there was, I watched a documentary when I was quite young. I think I would have been about 19 on ayahuasca. And I watched the documentary, but something intrigued me, even though it was portraying it in a negative light. I was like, okay. And then it wasn't for another year or so later. I had an older friend, he was about 50, kind of always that person that you meet that it was like a wizard,
Just
like just like new stuff that just was on another dimension, always gave really solid advice. But anyway, so he asked me one day, have you ever tried or heard of ayahuasca? And I was like, I watched this documentary, but nothing more. So it's like, if you're interested, I was living on the Gold Coast at the time. There's a medicine circle. I won't say where because I try and keep it fairly under wraps, but inland somewhere of where you live, not far. And I looked it up and got connected with these people, and I was hesitant for probably I knew about it for about 6 months to a year before I went.
Thought about it.
Yeah, definitely thought about it, that's for sure. And then I ended up just going. And
Where is your mindset at that time?
Where is my mindset? I had no idea really what was coming, what was around the corner. I guess the only thing was a sense of I was investigating. I was looking into life, I suppose. That was the foundation of a sense of curiosity. It was emerging, but I wouldn't say it was. It had no direction, that's for sure.
No.
It was very just whimsical, with an underlying sense that there is something more to be explored in life. So anyway, that first ayahuasca ceremony was one major catalyst for sure. I'm not sure. Have you had experience?
I have not. And
Okay.
that's why I would love to hear your perspective on it. Like,
Okay.
What was the process was? Yeah, at least for that specific one.
So that what happens is you show up at the place on the Saturday in the afternoon. The ceremony will be Saturday night. They kind of take your car keys and almost like check you in, give you the safety protocols, and you hang out there on the property. And then you drink it about, I think, 7 o'clock, and then it goes through until the morning. But the experience of taking a substance of that kind, I would say, is very hard to put into words because it plays with the borders and boundaries that your mind usually needs to operate in. So if you think we have a spectrum of colors that we know, that doesn't exist anymore. It's like the color spectrum is infinitely wider and more expanded. Yeah. And then the dimensions that we have in space, I'd say we kind of are 3-dimensional in space without even knowing how to go into a 4th or 5th. It's like there is another dimension of space that appears. So the rendering of the information that you get from there is often quite difficult. However, what is quite easy to render or communicate is that the experience itself leaves you with a clear understanding that you know nothing, you know far less than you thought you did, and that there is a whole greater world out there, and that in the blink of an eye, certain characteristics or trademarks about yourself that may have been the result of, you know, traumatic events or whatever, you know, just karmic stuff that is there, can be removed.
So it can be removed.
Oh, massively. You can have gigantic shifts in the perception of the world, for sure.
So do we say, like, if people who have no experience in kind of more, I guess, channeling that kind of side of it, can anyone really change themselves? Like, what if you're just
Okay,
not...
so I would say a recommendation on that would be that it's not for everyone, I would say. I'm not just going to prescribe it to everybody walking the street. You want to think of it as that the person has to have a relatively established foundation psychologically. So that means that they have, you know, a coping mechanism for stress or for traumatic events, that they're not kind of ungrounded in that sense, because the experience is very powerful. And if the person doesn't really have a strong sense of how to cope with intensity, it can be overwhelming, and then they can kind of shoot themselves into a sticky situation.
Yeah, that's the scary part of it, right? Like if you have a bad
Yeah,
trip or
yeah.
not knowing how to handle.
Well, I always think of the bad trip thing is something that I don't think is necessarily, but it sounds bad, you know? But in the sense of the more challenging experiences that I've had with the medicine work have been challenging but more beneficial, because that means that generally something that's a little bit stickier in terms of whatever is inside of you is processing its way out. So then the release can be a little bit more profound, for sure.
So when you see it that way, it's a positive thing.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. It might not feel like it at the time.
Yeah.
But then again, it comes back to the people facilitating the work. If they are kind of strong in their capacity to hold the space and to help you process what's going on, it can go from, in the blink of an eye. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the old school acid trippers that learned or that figured out that when the acid trip's going bad, you just have to breathe.
No, I don't know about that.
So you move like if you're stressed, it's a physiological reaction. Your diaphragm will stop moving so much, and your adrenal glands will pulse. So you can imagine if you're tripping and it's stressful, and you're then having that physiological reaction to the stressful situation, it just amplifies it. So it gets worse and worse. But then if someone is skilled enough or even clear-headed enough to realize this person's not breathing, and I put them back into their breath, then most of the time the mind really relaxes. It's exactly like if you have a 2-year-old child having a tantrum. If you can get them to take 3 deep breaths, there's a severe shift in the severity of that tantrum. So it's very similar with that kind of work. That's again the coping mechanism that I was probably referring to earlier.
So how important is the breath when it comes to yoga? And explain to people who just have not interest in yoga, but probably don't know so much about it, that this could be such an important practice in their lives if they, had an open mind to it.
Let's approach that from 2 perspectives, I suppose. The first one is the physiological reaction of your breath. So if you think of your brain keeping an eye on your bodily functions, i.e. if you need to go to the bathroom, or if you are cold, if you are hot, if your liver's overloaded, whatever, your brain is monitoring all your systems all the time to some degree. But the most watched system by your brain is your breathing and probably your heartbeat. So it has the highest impact in creating mental stability or instability. You can imagine if you're unable to breathe, your body will shut down basically every other system in your body in order to get your breathing system online, because you have 4 minutes without breath before it's all over.
4 minutes is the number? Oh, okay.
I think there's a number of days. You have 4 weeks without food, 4 days without water, 4 minutes without air. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure they are the numbers. So you can imagine that if you're not breathing properly, which a lot of us aren't in the way that we should be breathing due to our rounded shoulders and whatever else you have going on in the world, then it's very hard for you to have a stable mind and to be able to feel at peace. And so that would be the physiological need to breathe is quite clear. But the more that breathing system gets smooth and functions well, I think the clearer your mind can become.
So that's just in a simple form, we could declutter our mind with just breath.
Totally. Or you can build a relationship with your breath that it turns it into a tool to help you cycle through the tensions that you usually go through in life. So you can imagine as if your phone goes off, it's kind of sending a signal to your brain that something you need to address an issue. Now that probably only happened a fair bit less once upon a time when we were living in a more simplistic world without phones, and now it's happening hundreds of times a day. So the impact on the human nervous system is quite different. What was there? We're now exposed to more information in a day than what we were exposed to in 5 years, like 100 years ago, or even that. I was probably modest with those numbers there, but some ridiculously large amount of information goes through our heads every day. So that requires a processing, and breathing is probably the most, I call it like the bridge between the physical body and the mental body. So it's that thing that is physical, because you can clearly connect to your breath on the physical level, that permeates into your mind and has an effect, a soothing effect on it. So if all that information is causing your mind to become a little bit like overloaded, like a computer with too many tabs running.
It's exactly that.
Exactly. A breath of fresh air is quite nice in that situation.
So then what motivated you to want to learn yoga? Like, where did it all begin?
So I was in Los Angeles, had a girlfriend at the time, and she was living in downtown LA, I think, from memory. This was quite a while ago. This was slightly after the ayahuasca incident, maybe.
After.
Yeah, right after. So they go hand in hand. Anyway, so she was living there, and then I remember one day I was like bored. She was at work, and I was like, I need something to do. I'm going to go to yoga because I'm in LA, because that's what people do when they're in LA, apparently. So I went to a yoga class, and it was like I don't know if you've heard of Wanderlust Yoga, but it's quite a famous, well-known touring yoga festival, but they also had a headquarters in LA. And the class that I just showed up because I didn't check the schedule. At that time, I wasn't very organized with those sorts of things. But I just showed up, and it was a level 3 class. And a level 3 class is quite an extreme thing.
You jumped into it.
I just said, I'll survive, I guess, and so people were doing really cool stuff. And at the time, that's kind of what was necessary to capture my mind. Because I had no idea of the deeper elements, or that I was seeking something maybe a little deeper. So yes, I went to that class, went back a few more days after that. Eventually that relationship ended, and I went back to Australia, and I was like, I might keep doing yoga. And
what captivated you about it?
Well, it was just like the right balance between learning how to be stretchy and strong. Because I'd done a lot. I played football when I was younger, done a lot of time in the gym lifting weights, kind of just a lot of physical activity, but without any sense of mindfulness or any sense of flexibility. And I knew that I didn't want to be one of the old men that couldn't touch their toes, or let life. My dad played football his entire life, and he could hardly move by the time he was sort of late 40s. And I knew that wasn't something that I really wanted to end up with.
What happened?
injuries, like injuries. And I guess now we're much better, but he had knee operations back before. They were kind of like, so these things take their toll on the body. And I mean, Australian football, are you familiar with it?
Is it different?
It's different. It's
It
very
is,
different.
okay.
Yeah, it's quite savage.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of similar to your ice hockey. Definitely never thought of flexibility in my life. So that was probably my main draw to go into yoga.
Just do the athletic.
Just to
just
get,
another level.
healthy body, I could see the benefits of being able to be flexible as well. So yes, so that was that part. But then I moved to a new part of Australia where I didn't really have too many friends. I had enough friends to be quite comfortable, but I knew that I needed to find more community. And I'd asked a friend if he knew any yoga teachers on the Gold Coast. And he said, yes, I know a really good one, probably one of the best ones I've ever met.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that sounds great. And I went, this was my first connection to what's called Ashtanga yoga.
So explain to people
What that is.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was a man called Krishnamacharya, who is said to be the father, so to speak, of what we know as yoga in the West. He trained 3 main students, BKS Iyengar, Patabi Joyce, and Desikachar. So they each founded a style, let's say, or a method. Method is a better word. A method of yoga that they were taught by him. So Krishnamacharya taught them individually, and each one was kind of in a different set of life circumstances. So they learned a different approach to yoga, which then they continued teaching, which then founded what we know as the kind of the backbone of there's 1,000 different types of yoga now. But that's the backbone. So Ashtanga is one of those. That's Patabi Joyce's line, which is Patabi Joyce was, I think, a teenager when he started learning yoga. So the methodology was quite rigorous and quite physically intense in order to kind of give his young, fleeting mind a strong physical thing to focus on. So I went to this class of Ashtanga. I'd done what we know as Vinyasa yoga today. So Vinyasa would be just Ashtanga yoga, but then made a little bit easier.
Okay,
just made a bit more user friendly.
Okay,
Instead of it being a 2-hour or something minute practice, it's 1 hour. It's more chilled. They take a few poses, but it's not the same kind of approach or mentality towards it. So this was my first experience with Ashtanga yoga, and it was immediately a different, it was like a different animal. I can remember walking in, it was about 6 o'clock in the evening. It was probably 10 minutes before. And I walk in and the room was already kind of full, and I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. You always know when a room's full like that, the person is clearly sought after.
Yeah.
So I kind of put my mat down and just set myself up like I normally do. But I noticed that everyone was either in a position called Virasana or Supta Virasana, which is just a stretching pose for your psoas muscle, really. On the floor, you kind of tuck your legs back underneath you, and then you kind of lie back and you stretch out the front side of your body.
Okay.
Or they were meditating in a quite upright meditation seat. And there was definitely an air of seriousness or discipline in the room. So I took my spot and I let the next 10 minutes kind of unfold, not knowing what was coming. And then at like 5:59 and 59 seconds, in walks this man. He was 6'4", big, strong presence, said some words. And then for the first, there's an opening mantra that is, I think it takes about 1.5 minutes to chant. And the entire 35, 40 people that were in the room chanted the 1.5 minute long Sanskrit mantra perfectly, without it wasn't normally when we do it now, we chant first as the teacher and then the students reply, they just copy what you said. But they all sung it together. And that kind of very much caught my attention.
What was happening in that? Is there some kind of synchronicity that happens when you
Insane
all
level of
move?
synchronicity. Yeah.
Is it vibration? What brings
Well,
us to that?
I would say it's like, are you familiar with the topic of what's called resonance?
I know.
Okay, so you might have heard if I say we are resonating together right now, we're agreeing with each other. Wherein I'm saying something and you're feeling inside, oh yeah, I get that. That makes sense. That's being in resonance. So in dissonance is the opposite, where I'm saying stuff and you're like, shut up, that's wrong, you know? So resonance is the attractive quality between two things that are, it's like magnetic. Yeah. So you think when two things are energetically aligned, there is resonance. And so I think that what's happening when a large group of people synchronize their breath, because resonance is an electrical theory, electrical concept. So you can imagine that our electricity that flows through the lights that's here, or making that little gun go like this at that certain speed, is a frequency that's going up and down. It's an oscillating current. That's why it's called AC. But that's happening in relation to your breath inside of your body. So you can imagine that we're breathing with an alternating, the breath is exactly that. It's igniting your body with an alternating current. And so when that's done in synchronicity with each other, generally there is a deep resonance that can be felt between two people. If you're looking to try this out, it can be really useful if you ever have a conversation with a friend or something, and that friend is prone to speaking really fast or getting caught up. You just start slowly breathing into your belly, and you watch them start to slow down. They won't know why.
Really?
Yeah, it really works. It 100% works.
You could project that onto someone
Totally.
and just completely. Oh,
Totally.
wow.
Yeah, 100%. It really works. I've really
used it a
tested
lot.
that. Yeah.
A lot of fun.
Yes. A lot of conversations where I realize, and also on yourself, you know, like when you're, because now what I do is speak in front of people, and I wouldn't say that's clearly, it's not the most comfortable thing to do. It's quite a challenging thing, but in order to do it well, you have to be relaxed. So a concept of low and slow, like making sure that there is your diaphragm moving when you're breathing, probably could be used when you're tattooing. You know, you check yourself every so often. Like, what am I actually doing right now? Am I clear? And then you think of your breath as an anchor to the moment, to what's appearing right now. Because if your mind is consciously aware of your in-breath or your out-breath, that's happening now. So that's to kind of wrap up the question of the breath in yoga, is the breath is the bridge to connect us to the present moment. So the physical postures are seen as almost like a challenge or like a game. Can you take the posture but stay connected to your breathing whilst doing it? So can you complete this challenging task but stay meditatively engaged? So then it transfers to life. Can you deal and process the challenges of life whilst you're meditatively engaged, whilst you're staying connected to your center? So that's where the breath kind of, to complete our story of the breath, that's the whole essence of it in yoga.
It's the most important thing about
It's the
yoga.
in my understanding or my experience of the subject, I would say it's the most important thing. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the breath. You know, I've learned to use the breath, and it served me very well as a tool. And I think it's, of the things you can pick to focus on, it is probably the best. And this might be biased, but I think because you always need to breathe. So you need to have it with you regardless of whether you want to be with it or not. So the method or the point that you've chosen to concentrate on will always be there. But then you can totally engage with concentration through other means. You don't have to use a breath-based awareness. You could use repetition of a mantra. You could use repetitive movement. You could use all kinds of things, you know. People find different ways to access concentrated states of awareness. It doesn't have to be breath, but for me, that's the method that kind of works.
How do you find, like with yoga, how it's affected your relationships and the way you interact with people nowadays?
Has affected my capacity to be more tolerant of different ways of thinking, for sure. Has expanded exponentially, especially in the last. I've been teaching full-time for nearly 5 years. And I would say that since teaching yoga, my capacity to relate and understand to not all walks of life, but much more than before, has increased dramatically. Purely because I think that when you are in the position of a teacher, it's very necessary to remove your own biases and then favor certain people that you think like you, so they deserve the yogic teaching more, because that can create then you're not being clear. It's as a philosophical sort of component, it doesn't really have any political ties or any way of thinking. What we see emerging is that definitely the yogic people or the yogis of the world have got a certain political affiliation due to the kind of personality that it attracts. However, I don't believe that to be the case. If you were to just genuinely study the subject, you would find very little to no political affiliation in any way. So I think it's for any type of person, regardless of your circumstances or the way you view the world.
And it's just help, I guess, view people in a more empathetic way. Is there that
Yes.
kind of sense?
In a sense, I think you have to have a higher degree of empathy because you are relating to a lot of people in that way. But it would also, I guess, from relating to those people, you learn to understand differently. You never know what someone has been through or where someone has been or what, or even, we all kind of wear masks to some description. And what's underneath the mask most of the time is exactly the same. It's a very beautiful person that really just wants the world to be a better place. But the construct of the mask is randomly assorted by what we think will help us serve our needs in the world or what we think will keep us safe or protected. So yeah, you learn, I guess, to be empathetic because you realize that it's all just a performance, and underneath we're all the same.
Do you sometimes fall under that mask? Like, does it always
the
get to you
time.
too? Like, when do you lose your discipline?
All the time, I guess. It's a constant struggle to, I don't think it ever ends. It's a constant unraveling of another layer of egoic constructs that you've created to convince yourself that you're now liberated. So you think of the first spiritual moment this is quite a common occurrence. You have a profound insight or moment, and then you spend the next however long of your life thinking that you're enlightened because you had this one moment, and that you know everything until the time comes where it collapses back and you realize that you know nothing. And then the moment that you realize that you know nothing is then again another spiritually profound moment that then can lead to the birth of another egoic construct that then thinks they know everything. So I guess you're always falling into the layer of your mask until you can get close enough to it to realize that it's kind of like, those dolls, Matryoshka. I think it's Matryoshka or something along those lines. The Russian dolls. Every time that you think that you're there's another layer. And that probably goes on for a lot longer than we can even comprehend right now. So I am totally trapped in my own mask.
When you were doing these experiences, did you ever experience an ego death?
That's a great question. And ego death is any time that you have a realization of any spiritual nature, that genuinely, so just to define it so that it makes a bit more sense, from my perspective, is spiritual practice is one that moves you towards a greater whole. So right now we live in a very divided world with clearly defined boundaries, i.e. the body is something that gives us this distinct differentiation between ourself and other. So anytime that you have a spiritual moment, it's one that kind of might connect you into the universe in some way or help your understanding of who you are to integrate itself back into the whole a little bit more. So anytime that happens, even just through the contemplation of realizing that if I don't drink water in the next 4 days, I will die. So am I separate from the water? It would be hard to make that claim. If I don't breathe in the next 4 minutes, am I able to survive? No. Am I separate from the air? Well, I don't work without it, so it's hard to imagine. So anytime that realization dawns, I think you could consider it to be in some way the death of an ego, because ego being that which is separating you or convincing you that you are this and that is not you. So yes, I would say fair to say that I have experienced the death of the ego in that sense. And then I guess from the more universal approach to the topic of ego death, yes, my personality has been severely rectified. Definitely strong remodeling. One of the things that's been quite high on my priority list is with the development of knowledge and insights and the ability to do whatever you do well, to try to equally devote time to the development of humility. Because I think that humility is paramount in the spiritual discipline. If it's not carefully cultivated along with wisdom, then the wisdom can create another expression of the ego. So yes, I think that's been my most profound, let's say, insight into the relationship to your ego, is that a step towards humility is an ego death in itself.
That's how you counteract it, which makes sense. I never knew the opposite of what ego was, and humility is that.
Yes, totally, totally. A humble person is someone, I think in order to function as a human body, we all have to have an ego. But the ego can amplify itself to the point where it becomes a hindrance. But if it's just kept kind of there so that you still eat, you still breathe, you still get sleep, you still work on yourself, because self-development shouldn't cease with the awareness that we're all maybe connected. But yeah, you hold on to a sense of humility, or spend time. Right now I just spend time listening to brilliant people speak, or read their books. And that to me is one of the easiest ways to humble yourself, because you realize just how extraordinary some people are. And it just sits you right back into a place of humility, for sure.
Where do you want to take your practice? Like, how far is it that you see yourself going with it, and what impact would you like to make?
So I don't think that there is an end in sight. One of the things that becomes quite apparent if you adopt the teachings in their entirety is that this is a multi-generational practice. So I guess that where do I want to take it in this current life? I want to just sow as many positive karmic seeds, deepen the knowledge base, so that wherever it goes in the next life, if there is that, I can leave as I don't plan to become enlightened, but that is the goal. Is not necessarily to think of enlightenment happening in this lifetime, but to be an influence on the trajectory of enlightenment for your consciousness in some way. So from the teaching perspective, I've never really had a plan with the teaching thing. It's just kind of unfolded as it was. And it's given me an opportunity to live a life where the subject that I would be studying in my free time is the subject that I have to study to teach, which then provides me with the money that I need to live. And so everything is integrated now. So that's enough, that's more than enough. The fact that I can spend my time doing what I want to do, I guess, is a remarkable thing. It's like probably the same for you with tattooing.
I guess we can go back to reincarnation, and I want to know your belief system about, do you think things are written, and how does free will affect all of that? That
really is the ultimate question. Okay, so I will answer this. So I have my partner, she's also a yoga teacher. Yes. And this is our, whenever we have a disagreement, in terms of philosophical and normal disagreements, we have those all the time too. But this is like a yogic disagreement. We've gotten very good at it now because we've had a lot. But we can always trace it to the idea that she believes there is no free will, that we are, or our fate is karmic and it's unfolding and there's nothing we can do about it. And my interpretation is that we do have a small agency of free will that is far less than what we think. The future is fairly written. Yeah. But the idea, in my opinion, is that you do have a small window of free will. So you can imagine that life is just a consistent flow of choices. And really it's a yes or a no. And that comes into a craving, like I want that, or I don't want that. Now, either of those choices is creating karma in one direction or the other. Depending on the intention, it's either good karma or it's bad karma. However, the third choice is that of equanimity, or to preserve the innate serenity of the mind and be impervious. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you never make a decision. It just means that you're not attached to the outcomes of the decision. If it's a yes, it's a yes. If you think it's going to be a thing that you should do, that it might serve others, it might serve the world, then yes, you choose yes, but you're not attached to the fruits of the outcome. So that there is my take on free will. But it's a very big question. Yes. It's a very good question. I think it's a very healthy thing for people to contemplate.
Because even when you talk about karma, like, I want you to explain what karma is.
So if you think of the word karma, it's directly translated to karma is action. So karma is the cause and effect. So I do this, then this will happen. Now, what we know as your good karma or your bad karma is the kind of the circumstances that are appearing in front of you for you. You can think of karma in a way like what we were talking about earlier, the resonance. Your magnetic pull could be, so if your karma has a certain frequency, it's going to attract a certain frequency. So that's where that comes into, this is my karma. Now, there is an interplay of karma potentially that goes on between people, which they call the collective karma, which is kind of what we as humanity have to deal with. So as much as it's my karma, your karma, our karmas mix together, and so we're all influencing each other. So that kind of ties us all in, which is a useful idea, because then it brings us together, unifies us, and can help maybe overcome some of the ideas of separation.
So we can be each other's karma?
Totally,
yeah?
Totally.
Wow.
Totally. There's
so karmic partners or karmic situations are real.
There's imprints for sure. Well, again, it's very hard to say this. This is my belief, from investigation and perspective. So I can't prove any of it. But I do definitely believe that if you sort of contemplate cause and effect, it makes sense. So what I believe that we are, at our deepest essence is a pile of karma, and that pile of karma maybe sequences into your DNA, and then that DNA acts kind of like an antenna, and that is the antenna of the connection to the universe that is bringing you into existence. So karma is like a thing that a karmic seed is always burning within all of us, and it's burning away. And then if I say become entangled with that karmic seed, like something appears inside of me or in my life, and I react with craving or aversion to that thing, then I create more karma. So karma is just this thing that just keeps piling up. It's kind of like your tax.
You said, so we were born with like a specific karma? Okay,
for sure.
Explain that part.
For sure. We are born, you are really an extension of your mother and father.
Their karma.
Their karma. Well, their karma is your karma. Because there isn't really a difference between you and them. Even though we'd like there to be. But there really isn't. Yes, you are born. Then it gets a little vague on the, let's say, the different schools have different viewpoints on the construction of the individual, whether it's the soul, where your soul sits in relation to your mind, where your mind sits in relation to your ego, etc. Like the different schools have different beliefs on that. But my general idea of it is that karma has been going on collectively for a very, very long period of time, probably since before we have records of the universe. So to think that it's just something that emerges out of nowhere, no, it's an accumulated thing. So that's potentially why there is so much of it. So it can hurt your brain a little bit when you start thinking of how much bad karma or good karma as well equally, or how much karma there is in general.
How do you generate good karma and bad? It just...
You're looking at how do I relate to good and bad. Yeah, it would be the... and then again, that's going to be relative, because I think that your individual life circumstances will come together to give you a unique viewpoint on whether or not something is good or bad. And I think these politically polarizing ideas that keep encapsulating humanity are a clear example of that. I think on either side of these politically charged moments, you would find people that are believing wholeheartedly and will give you a very valid set of reasons as to why what their thoughts are good. And the opposite will say that that's bad. So I think good and bad is definitely relative, but and then it's very hard to really pin it down. But what I try to work off as an underlying kind of value is the action life affirming? Is it positive and life affirming in the sense like is it going to help prosperity and growth in a regenerative way? That's something that I would say is going to steer you towards good. And then that which is not life affirming is bad. Now obviously that's a spectrum and there's interpretations that can go in on that, but that more or less is what I use to give me a sense of good or bad. And then I try to, because I think what can happen is if you superimpose your own moralistic views too rigidly on what's good and bad, it can lead to becoming overly ideological and thinking that you know everything and that you really have thought everything. Like I often relate to times when we might think we know what the world needs to do in certain really hyper complicated situations, but really we haven't got the faintest idea, and we think that our simple ideological viewpoint can solve a very hyper complex problem, and often that's quite challenging. So my take on that is try to be as open-minded about what good is and bad is. And that's why I think that dialoguing with people long term is
What do you mean by dialoguing?
What we're doing now.
Yeah, just having a conversation.
Talking about something that's without trying to pin anything down, just exploring the idea and the concept without having a conflictual nature to the conversation. Because then that essence is that you can see from the way I'm moving through information is that I'm not very sure, but I'm trying to figure it out. And I can see the same from you. You're not maybe sure on everything, but you're trying to figure it out too. And at the essence of that, there's a common ground there, is that we realize that we don't know necessarily, but we're interested in figuring it out.
What has been the toughest part about you getting into this industry, or at least like practicing yoga?
There was an adjustment. I mean, it's fairly superficial, but there was an adjustment financially. Before I did electrical engineering. In construction in Australia, you get paid quite well. We built really big buildings, prisons and hospitals and stuff. So I had a steady base of income, and then switching to yoga teaching, that kind of got brought out from under me. Not in a really bad way, but just in a way that I realized I had to make changes in my spending habits, etc., and adjust things. Now it's all kind of organized, and but in the beginning it was a challenge.
And moments like where you feel like you're struggling with, like what kind of techniques would you tell anyone watching today they could I guess start now if they were listening to this?
Yeah, totally.
A simple technique.
I would say to have a certain, like you could use a gong, or you could use an alarm, or you use something that allows you to stop every so often and just take a moment of mindful reflection, whether it's using your breath, whether it's just asking yourself, like in certain moments, especially if you're scrolling on your phone, you just stop and you ask yourself, what am I doing right now? Does it have a purpose or an intention? Does it serve me in any way? Am I clear of what I'm doing, or have I just kind of gone into an autopilot state? And I think with that's learning to just become mindfully reflective from moment to moment. It can happen, and you can use once every hour you have a little gong that goes off on your phone, and the gong is just to come back to your breath for 30 seconds. So that would be insanely beneficial, I think, if we do that. I think they are starting to push it more in schools.
They are, yes. So how have you seen the future of yoga and just like awareness?
I would hope it continues to grow. I think that there are challenges for that, because when anything becomes popular, it becomes captured by corporate entities. So that does have its, you've got to be mindful of that, because anytime anything gets captured by the corporate side of the world, it does become less functionable and usable. However, you kind of need the corporate side of things to expand it into the spotlight enough. So there's a double-edged sword. But I do see it progressing, especially if we're able to get it into the schools, which I think, from what I understand, my sister has a little boy, and he's doing little bits of meditation and yoga in his preschool. So
what do you think how will it help the kids now, like practicing that at such an early age?
Well, I think that your mind is so much more adaptive at a young age. Neuroplasticity is way higher. So if you can onboard certain behaviors at a certain age, you might be able to, it's kind of like a child will learn a language much faster than an adult. So their potential to learn is in some way deeper.
But what do you think we're meant to do here on Earth? Like, what is your perspective of the meaning of life?
I really don't think there is one.
No.
I think that we invent one. I think that the whole thing is almost, it's a game. It's just it's an experiment. Life is it's just following a pattern, and I think that the meaning of life is probably to find your way back to the understanding that you're just part of a giant whole. So there really isn't a meaning to the whole thing. Maybe there is, and maybe I'm missing the point, but I don't think there is a meaning. I think that it's really just. I think when we think there's a meaning, we take everything way too seriously. Whereas life is just appearing, evolving. It's just following some pattern, and really to define a meaning is very difficult. But I think the religious domains have got it pretty accurate, is to find your way to the profound, or the whatever. The God is a polarized word these days, but find your way to some relationship with the divine.
Or when people talk about reaching their higher potential, like what does that look like for you? Like how do you connect with that?
We all restrict ourselves to what we believe we're capable of. And so the moment that you realize that self-imposed limitation is a function of your mind can be very empowering, because then you start to realize that your potential is far greater than what you first thought. Almost to the point where I think we are of limitless potential. So it creates a deep sense of passion for life if you realize that if you do want to expand your potential and what you're capable of, you can.
Thank you so much for being a part of this.
My pleasure.
It's been a wonderful experience.
Thank you very much.
To hear you share your part of your life.
My pleasure. Thank you.